Welcome to this webinar from Interactive Services. Today we're going to be talking about performance selling, how to use new hire training to build sales success. My name is Matt Plass, I'm the Chief Learning Officer with Interactive Services, and I'm joined by John O'Brien, who's looking after the technical side for us today. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. There are too many people on the line to have a dialogue, but if you do have a question, we will try to answer it. Please put it into the chat window to John or to myself, and if we can't answer it in the flow of the webinar, then we'll try to come to it at the end. So there's a question on the slide. Sales excellence can be coached but not trained. Do you agree? It's a rhetorical question, but it does lead us neatly into the first thing we're going to look at today. In our experience as a company that works with large organizations, it's astonishing how many of them still don't have a clearly defined new hire training program for people who come into the sales organization. Many do, but many do not. Taking on new salespeople is a huge investment. Like many roles in an organization, it can be months before you know if they're genuinely going to work out or not. So it's obviously worth approaching with some rigor. And best practice from our perspective is always to engage straight away with some very clear goals and process and a development plan. And it is amazing how many organizations will pick what they think is the right kind of person and hope they can coach their way into good sales performance and practice. And that with a bit of support it will all work out, when our experience is that's a very hit or miss approach to take. So in terms of what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at 4 areas and then we'll try and summarize them into a few steps you can take away around what makes good new hire sales training. First of all, we'll look at how soon you drop a new sales professional into the deep end, whether you start shallow or whether they should start gaining some real life experience straight away. We'll look at incentives and acceleration, and when we talk about incentives we mean more or not so much about remuneration, more about an incentive to move from one stage of the program to the other. And we'll try and stay away from the idea of competition, which is very common in sales training programs and which we all know works, but isn't a genuine incentive, I think. We're going to look at the role of the expert. In the modern world, expertise is harder to come by. Experts' time is more tied up. So we'll look at how we use the expert wisely. And lastly, we'll look at how we make it real. So a training program for a sales professional who's new into organization can be very long, and we want to look at how we can make it real with real work as soon as possible. First thing I'd like to do, and John, if you could open this polling question, I'd like you to think about new hire training for sales in your organization. We've put 5 common mistakes up on the board. You may see none of these, you may see all of them, but if you could just identify which of these you see as being most prevalent in your organization. And if anyone's new to using GoToMeeting, you should see now on your screen a poll which is a question that you're able to answer by selecting the option that you think is correct. Okay, interesting. So what we're seeing, I mean, I'll close this poll out now. What we're seeing, which I think is interesting, is 50% of people say the real failing is to link the new hire training to real work. And that's certainly one of the things we're going to focus on heavily over the next 30 or 40 minutes. Interestingly, the rest of the vote was split between the first one, which is failing to engage employees early, and the last one, which is failing to incentivize, not including financial incentives. So obviously salespeople are almost always on an incentive package, but many new hire programs for sales forget to incentivize people to move from one phase to the other, and that's what we'll look at as well today. So thank you for your participation in that. To help us look through this webinar, we're going to focus on 4 case studies. These are 4 initiatives that we've run with clients of ours. One is for AstraZeneca. It was a new hire sales program for pharmaceutical sales. We're going to look at a program we put together for SAP, which again was around business-to-business sales for new hire. We're going to look at a new hire program we put together for a manufacturer and B2B seller of consumer products. And we're going to look at a program for whiskey salespeople that we did for Diageo, which is a very exciting program. And I think the areas we want to talk about today, we're going to return to each of these case studies several times because they each highlight some approaches that we've taken in the past and that our clients have had some success with. So probably worth mentioning at this point, there are no right answers, or rather there are no wrong answers in what we're looking at today, and it's certainly not definitive in terms of what we should and shouldn't do. But there are some best practices in here that I think you should be able to pull and apply to your own organisation, so I'd hope you could. So let's come to our first question. It's the question of, do we throw people in the shallow end or the deep end? So we have a new hire who comes into the organisation. They have to go through some kind of induction and new hire program before they're ready to go. But at what point do we throw them in the deep end, get them in front of clients, get them talking to our clients? Do we do that straight away, or do we give them some support first and then put them in later? You know, what do we think is the best approach? So again, John, if you could run this polling question. If you think about best practice for sales new hire, would you throw them in the shallow end, the deep end? Would you do a bit of both, or would you do neither and let them run through a training program without any customer contact until you felt they were ready to progress? Okay, good. So I can immediately see that the majority of people, 80%, think it's both. A couple of people think neither. They would rather see an entire training program run without client contact. And a few people think start at the shallow end and move them through. And as I say, I don't feel there's a right answer to this, but I can show you a couple of best practice examples. So the first example we're going to look at is the AstraZeneca pharmaceutical example. When we're talking about shallow end, deep end, this is a program we put together for salespeople who work in a quite taxing environment. They're working in hospitals and healthcare centres. They are influencing doctors to prescribe certain medicines, and they have very small windows of time when they're able to meet with these doctors and talk to them about the medicines they need to be prescribing. So there's a huge piece in this sales program around understanding the medicine and understanding the disease state that goes behind it. But then there's also the conversational piece. What do they say when they're in front of the potential client or the doctor to try and influence them to prescribe that particular product? What we did with this program is we did a combination of the shallow and the deep end. So we introduced field activity almost from day one. So almost from day one, the new hire goes on a ride-along sales meeting, and they are expected to contribute, but they're expected to contribute very little. So it might be that on that first ride-along, their buddy or mentor will perform most of the conversation, and the new hire will be given a very small piece that they're able to present to the doctor or to the client that it's almost impossible for them to get wrong. It might be a very small scripted piece about the company, and we do that straight away. So right from the very first week, almost from day one, they get a sense of what it feels like to be in that sales environment. As you move through the program, there's more of this field activity, and each time the balance changes just slightly until by field activity 4, the one on the right-hand side, it's still a ride-along, but the roles are now reversed. The new hire is leading the meeting, and the buddy or the mentor is taking the back seat and only jumping in when they have to. So this is a nice example of a combination of that shallow and the deep end. Here's another example. This is the program we put together for SAP. Just so you know what you're looking at, the program was designed around a portal that learners could access through their intranet. It followed the sales process that SAP used, which goes through discovery, understanding, solution, proof, justification, agreement, implementation. And each of those blocks of learning, or blocks of the sales cycle rather, were given a week in the learning. So each week you would begin with some online learning to understand the basic foundations. You would see some online activities. You could then complete some offline activities around research. Then you would have some field activities where you needed to go out and start applying what you were learning to your target list or your contact list. And then there would be an assessment at the end of the week. So in terms of throwing people in at the deep end, again, right from the beginning, we start looking at field activities that include real work. But they come towards the end of a week, during which you will have spoken with your manager and your buddy, and you'll also have taken a number of online learning modules and performed several research activities. So by the time you come to that field activity, you feel prepared for the very small piece that you'll be learning. And because the learning program maps to the sales cycle, when you're in discovery, all you have to do is discovery. The only thing you need to worry about is how to do that discovery piece, how to present it to your manager or your buddy, and it's only when you get into the understanding and solution piece that you might start talking to the clients. So again, it's that combination of the shallow and the deep end that we found to be very effective.